Welcome to Frankly Speaking with Sendra D, where we dive deeply and help you wake up to the essence of what it means to live a real, authentic, affluent life. Beyond the balance sheets, the bank accounts, the private jets, the political offices, into the realm of inner wealth and personal power. I'm Sendra D, your companion guide on this trajectory of truthful self-mastery as we celebrate your individuality and your sovereignty.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another fantastic episode of Frankly Speaking with Sendra D. And guess who I am? Well, I'm Sendra D. It's such a pleasure to meet you, to see you again. Well, I'm not seeing you. I am, broadcasting to you today. And I'm trying to impress. Yes, I am trying to impress my audience with the guests that I have. And of course, you smart people that you are, I want to bring you information that can help you grow, evolve, and succeed. So today with me, I have someone that I find extremely fascinating because he is let me just say, first of all, he is in New York, but he's nice. He does his ego, unless he's trying to pretend to be nice, but he really is. Thomas Williams is the managing director of WC Advisors, and he's based in New York. He works with ultra high net worth individuals, but he also helps businesses, small and medium-sized businesses grow, which is in my world, which means money, how to get money, where to get money, and how fast can you get money, right? Those are the three questions that people usually come to me for, because we're actually in the same space. And I tell Thomas we're never competing because there are thousands of business owners starting every day, launching every day, and not everybody's a fit. I'm very much of a straight shooter, and I tell people, if you don't want the truth, then come to me. I think Thomas is going to be a little bit more polite. So if you want more politeness, go to Thomas. If you want straightforward, you can come to me. I mean, I grew up in Montgomery County, which is right outside of DC, as you know, probably by now. So we're kind of rough around the edges. And, my dad was military and I was told not to speak. So when I got my voice back, I said I would never stop. So which is why the show is called Frankly Speaking with Sendra D. This is a place where you can come and talk about anything you want, specifically to how it benefits the professional C-suite, leaders around the world. Yes, this is a global podcast. And the one thing that I'm putting on pause, I've mentioned before, I'm pausing on politics. I'm fasting for Lent. I started January 19th, and I will not reconsider going back into that conversation until April 21st, which is actually Easter. So I am fasting with Jesus. So that said, let's begin. So let me tell you a little bit about Mr. Williams. So he began his career. He's from a small town. He grew up, unlike many people in Wall Street, grew up very, working class. I can think of one other person who has sort of the same rags to riches on Wall Street, but I guess it's Steve Bannon. He's not on Wall Street anymore. He said he grew up in working class, but he ended up working for Goldman Sachs. But it's refreshing to hear people who stay true to their roots, because growing up in a family where family first and not money first, what is very, it sort of builds character. So he then went into the military and served. He actually lived a few places. I'm not sure if you were deployed, if you actually were on the front lines, but I'll let you tell that part of it. But eventually ended up in finance and got an MBA, and then went up on in finance, set up a few family offices, and this is your second family office, I believe, correct? But so of course, I'm someone like Thomas who specializes in ultra high net worth, but also if I see a good idea out there that's less than 5 million, come to me. I will definitely help you with that. So that's what we're talking about today, the small to medium sized businesses. So first of all, welcome, Thomas. And of course, I'm going to call him Thomas because I would like you to bring that, he served our country. So I have to give him that respect. So then I want you to start telling us what I missed and what would you like the audience to know about you just to for them to get to know you.
I would just say that starting from humble beginnings with big dreams, certainly on the academic stage, but you know, college and education's a extremely expensive path. Although it's a very proven path, but it's very expensive, and a often not discussed possible path is to let the military pay your way. And what I would say, even more shocking for me anyway, and this is back when I was going to college, was that the quality of the education that the military can get you. So for me, growing up in a few different places, humble beginnings, I was very good with math and science, and I thought engineering is the path. And if you have big dreams, the first name that pops up is MIT until you look at the price tag and then you fall down. But the Navy recruiter said, "Oh, the Navy can pay for that." I said, "Really?" They said, "Yeah, you just have to serve a few years after you're done." And I thought, wow, everybody else I know works at McDonald's or something very, unglamorous to try to pay some of the bills. And then they get a huge loan and then they pay it off forever. And, it's just a very difficult path. And I thought, I know nothing about this military thing, but I'm sure in 4 years, the fact that the debt is completely repaid and I get an actual job after graduation, a job in my field, that's pretty good. But it turned out that I didn't choose MIT. I chose the Naval Academy instead. And they also have a very good engineering program. And I did serve. And unlike a lot of military stereotypes, I did not join because I wanted to go to war. I did not join to pick up arms and to be in conflict. I was a nerdy engineer. I just wanted to go to a great school, use my engineering degree, help my country if I could. But then, coincidentally, the war in Iraq broke out and I got sent to the front lines. So I did do a lot of growing up. I got a combat action ribbon. We blew up a ship. We launched 40 Tomahawk cruise missiles. And when that finished, I said, I paid my debt. It's time to move on. So that's when I went to UCLA Business School and started my career in finance. My first place I started, actually, I worked at a lot of the big banks. That's usually where people start. And I started at UBS in London. The Brits call it Warburgs. And they have a term, instead of Wall Street, they call it the city. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of the Wall Street of London. But then I quickly pretty much came to New York because of the work permit issues and difficulties and a career path if you're not a citizen. And I worked at UBS in New York. Then I went to JP Morgan, then to Deutsche Bank, and working in the wealth management space. But I didn't have my own clients. I was more of a product specialist. So I had a specialty and I supported the in-house clients that they had. And my specialty at the time was derivatives. And because my very strong math background, I was in the over-the-counter derivatives. So we privately structured these derivatives. And so we did what they call over-the-counter derivatives. We did hedging and monetization. We did structured notes. We did all the asset classes, equities, fixed income, currencies, commodities, even some ones that you might never have thought of, like insurance, earthquakes, hurricanes. We did a lot of stuff. But the point is that after that finished, I moved over to the buy side, to the family office side, and a friend of mine and I, we built a multifamily office here in New York. We got up to $1 billion in assets that we were supervising. And then I moved over more recently to a single family office. But most of my family office side of the business has been on investing, in the investment side. So I help filter through the markets, the public investments, if a client, what would their portfolio look like? Why would we include different items into the investment catalog? Which equities, which fixed income, which currencies, which commodities, which alternatives, all of those things. And now at the single family office, I still do the same, but now a little bit more focus also on private investing. And so for me, it's actually a surprising joy that I have discovered later in life. When you're a young person in wealth management, the first thing all the big banks feed into you is, who are your rich friends? We need to talk to those rich friends. And if you go to a cocktail party, you got 5 minutes per person. Then you have to start moving. You can't enjoy yourself. No, that's not why you go to cocktail parties. You must 5 minutes with every rich person in the room. You size them up and you stalk them. And that just never felt comfortable to me. It never felt good. Even if I did engage people, I would always talk too long. I would get scolded. Oh my God, you spent 30 minutes with that guy. That's so inefficient. I said, I'm getting to know him, you know? But the point is that what I found is that meeting entrepreneurs was the place that I really resonated, the place that I really found happiness, because there's just things about entrepreneurs that resonate with me. You know, they're very independent. They're not necessarily went to business school. Some did, some didn't. It's immaterial. It's all about, you know, performance. You know, do you have a smart idea? Can you execute? And then it's all about, you know, well, what does the world look like and how do you position yourself? How do you build that team? Raising money, getting clients, all these different things that I very much enjoy. So I started because it was part of my job to filter these for the family. And then the more I did it, I started realizing I kept in touch with all these guys. And eventually they'd start calling me, hey, you know, I know your family didn't invest, but do you know anybody else? I said, yeah, I know a lot of people. I'm a people person. I like people. Call me crazy. I like people. It's very old school. Everybody loves their phone now. I like people. I like people more than my phone. How about that? I like people more than my social media page. How about that? Shocker. But then again, I'm happy. The people who are on social media 24 hours a day, they're the ones that aren't happy and they don't know why.
And over-medicated, may I add, over-medicated.
Well, it's also known to be that social media is really not social. It's really anti-social. If you really break it down, the process of being involved with social media is actually antisocial.
It is.
And so, but if you
that's
know
another
that,
topic for another day.
yes, if you know that, you can work around it. But the point is that, so I have all these legacy relationships with all these different entrepreneurs, all these different companies, and I help them raise money, I help them find, and this is, we'll get into this in a few minutes, but the gold standard investing and finding an investor is one who brings more than just money. They bring mentoring, they bring relationships, they bring advice, they bring a joint venture that you can partner with, they can bring you clients. So I know entrepreneurs, they get very, very tunnel vision because they see the cash and they feel like they can execute on their own. But if you remind yourself that the gold standard is try to do something a little more, you'll find a lot more success in life. But I'll stop for now, but that's been my experience.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, of course, you know, again, as I started with, talking about in the show, I'm very straightforward. When I take on a new client, especially startups, they're so passionate. And I actually appreciate that because I'm that way too. I was much more like that, a couple decades ago. Everything was exciting to me. Life was exciting. The unknown was exciting. And that's the thing. So when I have someone, and you could tell me, when I have someone come to me and discuss potentially me assisting them, because I don't take on everyone. There's an interview process. I go through the screening and capital raising because I want to make sure that I protect that investor too, because I'm not just matching someone and walking away. I am actually matchmaking. You could call me, match.com, because you want to make sure that the investor is their time is not wasted. You interview that person. You have to get to know the startup or the small, medium-sized company, because you want to be able to prepare the investor for what's ahead. And that said, many people who come to me just want to talk about the money. And what I'm hearing from you is it's more than just dollars, because you're going into a marriage. And I have seen and I have heard some disastrous matchings of relationship with startups. I mean, we can't ignore some of these big IPOs or big companies that have just gotten rid of their leader because the board just decided, or the investors decided, they were no longer a fit for that corporation. The personalities didn't match. Imagine as a founder coming in, bringing someone in, and then you get out, they take you out. They take you out. And that's something to consider. So let's talk about the capital raise process. I mean, for me, people reach out to me through LinkedIn. They have my website. Some people just refer to, through other previous clients. So there are different ways. So a lot of them are seasoned capital raise individuals, or, someone who's just never had a business before, who's maybe 21 years old. How about you? What is your capital raise process? Let's start there. Before we go, let's educate the audience as to what it entails, pretty much.
So one of the things that I was really happy to learn in business school is the venture capital and fundraising and private equity side of the world. Because when I was a young man in the military, there's a lot of us who had ideas of being an entrepreneur. And I knew, just growing up the way I grew up as an engineer, that you should always have a little pause about things you don't know, about things that aren't tangibly in front of you, to just roam out into the darkness and assume that it'll just happen. I've always been suspicious of that path for myself. And so even when I went to business school, one reason I had never tried to start a business, because I felt like I didn't understand capital raising. I didn't understand, what makes a good company from a bad company other than what you see on TV, right? Oh, it made a lot of money because people loved it. But everything else about it, I didn't know. And so I was rightly hesitant, even if I thought I had some good ideas. Business school was great because you could take a class and you could do what they call case studies, study the anatomy of businesses that started and all the details, the relevant entrepreneurial details that made it work or didn't work, and the ones that should have worked, but they didn't, the ones that shouldn't have worked, but did. And you start to see, once you do this over time, you get to the 10th or 15th one, you start to see a pattern. But the beauty of it is, if you're in a class with a professor who's an expert in the field, and I was lucky at UCLA, we had Dr. Al Osborne, who's a legend in the private equity world, and he taught our class with just enormous credibility, enormous background in the industry, and a wonderfully nice older man. And the point is that you need mentors to help you, because otherwise, if you try to learn it all yourself, number one, your business may not survive, because you need to know all this to be efficient. It's hard enough to start a business, but if you're just roaming around with no guide rails or, the important facts in front of you, it's going to be even harder. So what do I look for? So first and foremost, I would say, let me just start with what everyone looks for. And what most people look for is, first and foremost, do you have a good idea? Secondly is, can you execute, right? Because even if you have a great idea, it doesn't mean you're the person to execute it. And I remind people, the movie Social Network, one of the key items that came out of that, if you're a fact-based person and if you're a business person, not just a general audience saying, oh, that was interesting, I see what a fucked up guy Mark Zuckerberg was. No, but if you focus on the business aspects, and a lot of people miss this, how did that actually happen? The Winklevoss, or the Winklevi, that's the joke, because octopus, octopi, Winklevoss, Winklevi. If you're talking about two, you use the... Anyway, how did they lose the idea of Facebook? Because they came up with it. They had everything in place. They had the whole idea well thought out. They were at the stage of getting it coded. They already had everything. They had a business plan. They just needed someone to type in the code. Guess who they hired? Mr. Zuckerberg, because he was the coding guy. He was like a 19-year-old pimple-faced guy. So he coded it all up. And then he realized, they can't do this without me. So then he did the morally unethical thing. He stole it from them. But the point is, they went to court. They went in front of a judge. And his premise was, if you listen very closely, I'm the only one that can execute this. They had a grand idea that they could not execute. They just had an idea. You put a bunch of people together and you have a website with a bunch of pictures and they're supposed to mix and match themselves. And he told the judge, he said, no, I can execute. I can put the code that entices people to get on the page, that entices them to network to each other, that gives users a reason to stay on the page. Because if you're just looking at a static photo album, that's not really a multi-billion-dollar business. Anyway, the point is, he won the case, and the judge said, well, the Winklevi deserves something because they had the original idea. So he gave them some kind of 1% ownership, which eventually became like $10 billion. So it was still, they did okay. But
not
the
bad
point
at
is,
all.
Mark stole it, and Mark got the company because he could execute. He could actually make it come to life. They could not. So my point is, the person who has the great idea is not always the person who can execute.
Correct.
And if you start to keep that in your mind, you'll notice that as you go through life, you'll hear every couple months someone who says, "Oh, I got this great idea." And they're sitting at the bar pounding beers, and maybe they didn't even finish high school. And you know for a fact they could never execute that, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, oh, the basketball, I could do something better than the NBA.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what would it be? Blah, 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 blah. You know, put teams in London and Munich.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but you're not the guy. You're a guy at the bar drinking beer. There's
Right.
no way I would give you money to execute that because you have no idea what you're doing. You didn't even play basketball.
Right.
But it's a great idea. Okay, so it is common that that's the case. The point is that, you know, being able to execute, having a really good idea, and then being able to, you know, build a team. And one of the important things I learned in business school is you got to build a complementary team. And it's counterintuitive because, as we know from, as back to that conversation about social media, people's natural default is to hang around with people who look like them, think like them, dress like them. That's a default. And it's so much so that now people are polarized because there's so many people that don't want to talk to anyone except someone who looks like them and talks like them and dresses like them. But in the world of entrepreneurship, you can't fall into that trap. You'll kill your business. If you're good at A and B, but not C and D, you need to find someone to bring onto your team that can do C and D. So as an example, a typical Naval Academy guy is really good with the math, the engineering, and maybe a smart idea. But military guys know nothing about marketing. We know nothing about budgeting because that's not what we do. That's the whole reason we got Doge right now, because the military is just not good at budgeting and they're not really good at marketing.
Mm-hmm.
So when I first started thinking about entrepreneurship, marketing and, you know, budgeting and those kind of finance people, before I had my MBA, those are people you need on my team. Third is when it comes to raising money, they want to know that the entrepreneur is all in. Some of them have very firm rules about this, but it will come up in the conversations when you get in front of most professional investors. You know, if you have a house, is it mortgaged? Have you put your own money in? If you make $100K a year from your day job, you can't get away with saying, I don't have any money in the business. Now, if you're completely unemployed, first of all, that's a bad idea. Don't quit your day job to start a business. Have some income while you're in the early stages, but they expect you to have some money in. They also get a little curious, like, why don't you have friends and family? Why, if your dad is a pretty successful guy, why didn't he put some money in? Your brother works at Price Waterhouse. Did he put some money in? Because if your friends and family don't put money in, then they get hesitant. And then lastly, I would say is you need to understand the stages of finance. So as we say, friends and family is usually kind of the first round, because if nobody in your family and none of your friends put money in, at least you had better, but it's going to be hard to get that first person to put money in if none of those have. Second is usually angel investors, which sounds like you, Sendra. You know, high net worth people who have money, who can invest, and they're already comfortable in their life and they want something additional to do with their money and they'd rather invest in a small business than other things. And then you start talking about after that, the institutional round. So you have what we call a seed stage, which is when the company's at the very early stages, hasn't raised any money from outside. So friends and family can be there, but an outside investor, that's called the seed stage.
Mm-hmm.
Then once you get that round and you start making some money, some revenues, hopefully, you know, you built some structure there. Then you can go to a bigger round, and that's called Series A, B, C, D. And in the ultimate, you need to always have this in mind, not that you have to be firm about it, but if you want to raise money, you need to have an idea of what your exit is. And even if it's not your exit,
before we get there,
you just need to know.
Yeah, no, we will come back to that before we get there. But I want to stay more on the topic of when they are preparing to go to how can I say, to build, when they're building the team, and of course I've seen people in front of me as though I was a counselor, you know, a psychological professional, psychologist, you know, and you could tell the team is very dysfunctional. And so what is your insight into that process before we go into, because you haven't built a team yet, you're thinking about picking your team members. So that's one of the major challenges, because that can be so distracting from operating the business. What is your counsel to those?
Well, there's several different ways to do it. Again, if you're pre-revenue, which is a term you need to be familiar with, or pre-profits, because sometimes those are criteria for investors.
Mm-hmm.
It's usually hard to get people to join your team unpaid, right? So everyone understands it's easier to build a team when you have some cash to pay salaries. Even if you're paying a small salary and some equity, it still helps enormously.
Mm-hmm.
To ask someone to be a full-time part of your team, to be the CFO, to be the head of distribution, the head of sales, these types of roles with no base salary, it's very, very difficult. In some cases, there's not enough equity you can give them, right? Because in math, we have this term called an asymptote, right? There's the numbers that work, and then there comes a point where the numbers don't really matter anymore, right? So when someone tells you I can give you $1 billion or I can give you all the money in the world, it's kind of indifferent, right? For most people. Maybe Richard Branson might care about the difference, but for everybody else, $1 billion or all the money in the world, are you going to change your mind on what's being asked to do? No. So the same thing with equity. You can give people equity, but there comes a point where you just got to pay cash and pay a salary. Mm-hmm. So the point is that building the team is important, and depending on what your business is, how much can be done at which stage. So there's proof of concept. It really is case by case, but generally speaking, they need to know that the entrepreneur has a vision for how it fits. And one vision is you have one or two people and you're fundraising, but you have a very Excel mapped out group of people that come on board with the fundraising. And then the team is more ready to go to the next stage. As long as that's mapped out, and as long as the appropriate salaries and the appropriate believability that those are the right people and that that's all you need, then you can fundraise off of that. For other people, they just look at the team and they say, this team can't execute, for whatever, like if Sendra, if you decided to build a space company to send a rocket to Mars, people might say, Sendra, you don't have an engineering degree. And by the way, Elon's already on the task. We don't think you're the right person, just as an example, right? So there's certain times when people are out of their element, and that's when their family should tell them first before they get in front of, smart people. But it's really case dependent, and there's different models that can work.
Absolutely, there are. And I'm smiling because that going to Mars sounds a fantastic idea. The way planet Earth is right now, if I went to Mars, I wouldn't come back. I just want everybody to know
but
that.
You would be the passenger, not the builder of the rocket. That's
yeah, I'd be the passenger. Apparently, it seems like Jeff Bezos is offering, I think it's like $500,000 he's preparing a trip I don't know if it's Elon or someone, but anyway, we digress. So that's a great idea. Of course, I am a visionary myself who is always thinking about how did they come up with that? I am the kind of person who I'm very clear would definitely not be executing. I would definitely I'm great at building teams. And that's what I know about myself. I'm great at building teams and selling the idea, and I bring the people to execute and implement. But also, I'm sorry I interrupted you earlier because you were speaking on the process of, leading to the exit. So one of the things that I tell, founders and even small to medium, just if you're thinking of an idea, how I know the idea is going to be somewhat feasible is one question for me. Is it solving a problem? Is it solving a problem that you see? That's when most of these tech companies that we see now, AI, they're all solving my problem. I know for me, AI is solving major problems in my life. Time management is taken care of. Technology is definitely disrupting the old, I hardly use a pen anymore. But so is that how you see an idea, is how you get to somewhat measure it to see how receptive an investor would be to anyone that comes up with something that's never been done?
That's usually a very good starting point. When you start with that there's a problem that's known, and you start with that your idea can solve that problem, that goes a long way with investors. But equally, the reverse is also a problem. If you say, oh, I have this great idea, and it sounds kind of cool. Like the hip kids think, oh yeah, that's so neat, but it doesn't solve any problems.
Mhm.
The reverse can be the case. Yeah, it sounds interesting, but you're not solving any problems, and we don't believe.
Mhm.
So it can go both ways, but it is a very predominant theme. And the word in technology, when it's solving a problem, they call it disrupting.
Disrupt.
And
That's what I was
there's
thinking.
investors who call their category disruptors, right? And
Right.
that's why a lot of entrepreneurs in the tech space, they in their pitch, their elevator pitch, they try to
Mhm.
say we're going to disrupt this industry, that industry.
Absolutely. You're looking at airborne, you're looking at what else? The ride share companies, anything else? Well, the smartphones, of course, nobody uses their landline anymore. So
Cameras, digital camera instead of film cameras,
absolutely. We talked about the BlackBerry. You and I have talked about BlackBerry
Blackberries. Yep.
before. Yeah, so definitely are you a disruptor, but you have to be a stable disruptor. You can't just say, I'm just going to disrupt and not have a plan. So as far as the planning is concerned, from A to Z, you just walked us through some of the steps, but I interrupted you as you were talking about the exit. So one of the major things that is one of the major talking points to an investor, they want to see what's the how they're going to get that return on investor. And so we're going to talk in thoroughly about the investor types. But why do you think the average person, there are a lot of people, especially people in business school? I mean, I went to business school. I was in the city of London. That's why I went to business school. And you had, I have to say I was a little bit more enthusiastic in business school than the average person. The Brits were they didn't show their enthusiasm, but I had a great professor in private equity. His name is Guy Frazier. I don't know if you know him. He's not that old, but he had been a pioneer in the industry. He also headed a family office, and I kept telling him how excited I was. And at the time, I was thinking about everything I do was with Haiti in mind. I want to just go and just disrupt everything in Haiti, the way it's done or not done, and just bring ideas to Haiti. And he smiled. And and this was right around the earthquake. And I went to the earthquake and I came back with my tail between my legs. And I said, I think I'm going to pause on Haiti right now. But that said, so you have to think about not just the team, but you're talking about where you're going to go to market, right? You're going to have different geographic locations that you want to roll this out. The investors that's going to be part of your business plan. So step by step, talk us through what are the major points that you need to bring to an investor.
So I like to say that I think there's a misunderstanding about the business plan. And when I say a misunderstanding is that a lot of people don't know the purpose of the business plan. They don't understand how it works and the dynamics. But what I would say is, let's take a step back. I find that if you create the proper business plan, it forces the entrepreneur to go in depth and manage all of those issues that the investor needs to know. So it's not as simple as, here's the industry I want to disrupt, pay someone $5,000 to type out a business plan. It's actually the reverse. You need to take the different elements of the business plan, think it through, and map it out. And that process is not only going to get you a good business plan, but the reverse is it forces you as the entrepreneur to map out in a very clear, believable, realistic path for your company. So just as an example, the process of doing the pro forma financials, right? What does a dollar today from an investor lead to 5 years from now? What does your current company look like? And then 5 years later, with your best projections, best meaning conservative, well thought out, explainable path, what is the base case? And then you strip it back a little bit to be conservative, assuming that everything goes normal, not you get lucky, things go better than you thought, and then it's a normal path. What does it look like 5 years from now? What does your company look like? And then you strip that back and you say, okay, let's back into that. If a person gave me $1 today, if the business goes from A to Z in 5 years, what does that investor get back? And if they don't get back a number that's consistent with what is in the market, then you're doing something wrong and you shouldn't be asking for money. Or you need to change your business model so that you have more growth so that it is attractive to an investor. I'm not saying you only do businesses that make tons of money for investors. No, but there's businesses that don't make tons of money, and it's a business for you and maybe your family, but not for outside investors. If you're only going to double someone's money in 20 years, then maybe you're a philanthropy. Maybe you're just making the world a better place. There's a different type of investor for that. But if you're going to grow your business, 5x in 5 years, okay, now people will be interested to give you some money. If you're going to make the world a better place, then you want the church to be investing in you. You don't want to go to a venture capital firm, right? But my point is that the different components of the business plan, if you do it correctly and you do it yourself, and you realize that this is a filtering process for the entrepreneur, you learn so much more about yourself and what you need to do for your business by doing it. So the page of who's on the team, the minute you have to put it on a piece of paper and you look at it and you say, wow, that team's not complete, right? Like if you think about a sports team, right? You have a football team and they just have a quarterback and an offensive guard and a tight end. Like, well, do you have a wide receiver? Do you have any defensives? We know what makes up a football team because it's a long journey that watching football, we know what the team is made up of. It's kind of a universally known, an American football team has a certain makeup. Those same at businesses. So you start to learn that when you put together your page on what is the team, you need to have a team that matches the expectations. Do you have advisors? Okay, you got to put those on there, but the advisors will tell you, hey, I don't want you to use that. Or I don't mind if you use that, but let's have an agreement between us. What kind of impact does the advisor actually have? Can they tell you what to do to run the business? Or is it just put their picture up there because it looks nice? This process of getting advisors, building the team so that you can build your business plan, it's reciprocal, right? It goes two ways. So my point is that spend time on your business plan. Spend time making it the best it can be. When I say the best, I don't mean looks pretty. I mean the most functional, the most dynamic that reflects what a successful business will be. So you brought up a good point, Sendra. The total addressable market, we call it the TAM. So your great idea, do you think this is a US idea? Do you think this is UK?
Before we dive back in, it is a pleasure to tell you that my book, Sendra Inner Luxury, Unlock the Secret to Your Luxurious Self, now on Kindle and as well as on paperback. So feel free to rush and get a copy for your loved ones. In addition, if you are loving these extraordinary conversations about luxury, about balance, about emotional intelligence, about a little bit of politics, a little bit of spirituality, if you're loving all of it, well, rush to Amazon and get my book. You will learn emotional balance is from within. You will learn to elevate yourself to the frequency that you wish to express in the world. So there can be more love, more peace, more harmony. But there's more. You can rush to pre-order my next book, which is Sendra, Guide to Luxury Living and Emotional Balance. Well, for me, my brand is all about living from within, emotional balance, emotional intelligence, and luxury. And for me, these books are flowing endlessly from me to you with so much love. Let me know what you think. Let me know after you read it. Put a comment, put a review. I'd love to hear from you.
You need to filter that to the first 5 years because that's when the investor might want their money back. So you start today. I want to help Haiti, like you were saying before. Okay, well, Haiti's kind of fucking poor. So I don't know how much money you're going to make. Even if you disrupt a lot of things in Haiti, people in Haiti are very poor. I live there. So how much can you make? It's the same with investing in certain parts of Africa, right? When you invest in poor economies, you need scale because you're not really able to build in a lot of margins generally. So my point is, these are things you have to think about. And let's say you had this great idea to do something in Haiti, and you run the numbers and it's not really enough. So either you do it as a good Samaritan, which I'm sure you are, but an outside investor may not be such a good Samaritan. And they say, well, can you take this to somewhere else as well? Then you have a business that they might invest in, because now there's more money for them to get back. So to me, that's a very, very important part of the process. And back to your previous point, the exit, even though you might be a little bit more, the entrepreneur might be a little bit more not so worried about that, you have to think of your investor. Your investor does care. And even if you think this is my life's dream, I want to build this company and I'll be happy forever and never work another day of my life, that's great. But your investor isn't going to be with you for a lifetime. They want liquidity, or at least an estimate, in 5 years. So they need to understand in 5 years, what's their exit? Even if you're doing wonderful, they might want to get out to do something else. So the point is, an exit could be a merger. Look, we got this company, it's a great company, but we think Amazon will buy us in 5 years. Okay, fair enough. Or you could say, we think we could go public on the New York Stock Exchange in 5 years. Fair enough. But you have to justify each of those. And you have to justify what that money looks like at the end of 5 years, if that's your path, and why you think it's actually a realistic exit. So those things are very important.
Absolutely. So it's not just exit for you, but it's also exit for the investor. The investor needs to know how they're going to, while you're on the beach in, in the French Riviera, Cannes.
Well, by the way, that could be for you, right? If the entrepreneur
but it is for you as well. So it's
if the entrepreneur is exiting in 5 years, the investor needs to know that too.
Absolutely. So that's what my point was going to be. So you need to think about, for both sides, what does that look like? Or do you see a permanent partnerships? I have been engaged and involved in some real estate hotel chains who want to merge, and they keep the brand and they just buy the location, and they say they want to stay in management. So there are different styles of of constructing a JV partnership. So those topics themselves could take hours of discussion on different type of legal structures. That's something you should go to a legal advisor or
it's
contact.
more about the economics than it is the legal.
Yeah.
But the point is that it has to be realistic, and it has to at least offer the investor the chance to get out. And Absolutely. My point is that the investor wants to know, what is your base case, right? Absolutely. They may stay with you for 20 years. It has happened, right? There's some people, when I worked at Deutsche Bank, I had some clients that had been with Warren Buffett since the beginning. I think they were his neighbors.
I don't think they cloned Warren Buffett.
And the reason we knew this is because their stock certificates were signed in ink. They had a piece of paper. That's very unusual. But the point is that sometimes people do stay with you for that. But most, if they're not your neighbor, they want to think that they're getting out at 5. Even if they stay longer, they want to at least know that it worked out at 5 if they choose to get out. They may stay longer. Deutsche Bank people were doing pretty well. They were a client, and they weren't Warren. They were his neighbor.
In Omaha, Nebraska. Is that where he lives?
And they were from Nebraska, yes.
Yeah. So, one of those big acquisitions that I was thinking about when you were talking about how the exit. So Instagram initially, if you remember, was not by Mark Zuckerberg. And I remember, was it 5 years ago or 6 years, 6, maybe more, Zuckerberg made an offer and there was buzz everywhere, and we were waiting to see, and they paid $19 billion for Instagram. I remember
today they could have kept it and made a lot more.
They could have, but I guess they just wanted to, I think they went to launch something else, but that's just one. But I wonder if they had that in their plan. So I'm bringing this up because you don't know what the team's discussing behind the scene as to what the exit is. You just, as the founder, need to have that clear in your mind. You can also put it on paper. I've also asked
you have to research what is the realistic expectations.
Sure.
And what would be the path if it was?
Absolutely.
Right? So those guys probably said, we want 5 years. We think we'll be at this level and we could go public. And if I remember correctly, Instagram was worthy of doing public by themselves, but Facebook overpaid. Well, today we know they underpaid.
We know they didn't overpay.
But they paid more than what was thought to be the current value. And so the owners sold it to Mark, and I don't know how many people stayed or left and just took the parachuting. But the point is that Facebook, because they could have went public, paid a premium, but now in hindsight, 10 years later, Mark was a smart guy. He made a
He
lot
is
of
a
extra money.
brilliant man. I don't like him, but don't deactivate my Facebook account just because I say that. I just don't like his business ethics. That's all. I'm sure he's a good chap, as they say in England, but I just don't, what he did to the twins, and he's always cutting people off. But you know what? People know who they're doing business with, so that's something you have to do. Do your research as well, and that's the point I wanted to bring up. Not just the investor research the founders, but you have to research the investor too. So let's talk about, and we haven't really touched on debt financing. That's another strategy, because we have mezzanine financing that's offered to founders. So, can you talk about mezzanine financing and what
Sure.
that is?
So there's a couple different types of investing, and partly it depends on who is the investor themselves. So for example, you need to understand the categories. Venture capital tends to be a little later stage. They don't tend to do seed. And venture capital also tends to have what they call covenants. So they tend to have rules that if you don't meet certain targets, they have the right to come and take over the company in scale. They don't immediately take the whole thing, but they have a right to incrementally start managing the business to success if the founder isn't doing it. But again, that's a venture capital. Private equity tends to be more just pure equity, and that's just the way they are. Angel investors tend to be pure equity. But the point is, just understand when you're talking to each investor, what is their profile? Don't waste people's time asking for someone to invest in you that's the wrong type of investor. If I want $50 million, I'm probably not going to get it by the people in my local church. That's a lot of money. And most people that go to my church don't fit that category. So, but that's my point. So when you talk about debt, so that is very interesting. And again, I go back to the business school. There's a lot written about this, but essentially the reason that debt works for the entrepreneur is that it's lower cost, right? Because you just pay back the interest. I know it might be a lot, 10, 12, 15%, but if your company's going to go to the heights that you typically have to be at, if you think you're raising money, looking backwards, that's going to be very cheap for what you gave up, because the equivalent amount of equity is going to be light years more. Like I'm working with a company right now. It's a financial services firm. They're looking for $3.5 million. And if they get all equity, they're going to return, I think, 10x to the investor. But if they do debt, it's going to be like 12% over 5 years. And that's the way the debt will go. They'll just pay the 12%. If you do the math between those two, there's a huge difference, right? But there's differences in the way that it plays out as well, right? Debt tends to have assets as collateral, and you can almost guarantee that means the entrepreneur's assets is part of it. So if you have a home and you have a mortgage, do not be surprised if someone says, we want a second mortgage. And you think, oh my God, that's crazy. But they want to know if this business fails, you're not going to go on a beach somewhere and say, oh, I'm okay. No, they want you to be damaged. Just like they're going to be damaged, they want you to have that same risk. So just understand that while it might be cheaper to collect or just to pay interest payments, the problem is, do you have the assets to collateralize it? And if you're lucky enough in life to have a mortgage and own your home and can get a loan against your home, that's a nice way to double down and show how much you really care about your business, because you'll save more. And 5 years later, your equity piece will be a lot bigger. If you do the traditional and you give away equity in exchange for the money, my point is that yes, they don't usually ask for assets as collateral, but 5 years later, when you hit the home run, you might be worth 50 million instead of 100 million, because that other 50 went to your investor. But it's all a trade-off. And my point is, there's a lot written about this. You can look it up on the internet. There's MBA courses that can teach you this, but that's the essential nuts and bolts. But the point is that and you can't always get debt, even though you may want it, right. You may not be able to get it, because especially if you don't have assets, right? Today's world, there's a lot of businesses that are what we call asset light, like tech companies, but then there's businesses that are asset heavy. So like, auto manufacturing, you have this giant plant that you have to buy with a lot of this machinery and robots and equipment. So The good news is you can get a loan against that shit. The bad news is you have to pay for all that. So there's a trade-off, right? I had a client who was a fashion designer. We were looking to raise some money for him. He has zero assets, zero, just his home. Because you think about making dresses, which he does. And by the way, he's very successful. He dresses movie stars. But when we go to get a loan, he has no assets. The only thing he has assets are the clothes, the dresses. And if you don't follow fashion, once a dress is out of season or out of style, it goes from 100% to 20 cents, right? Everybody knows what TJ Maxx is. Why do you think those prices are off? Because they're out of season, or those were great last year, but not this year. My point is, lenders know this and they don't lend against that stuff.
Right.
And he doesn't own the manufacturing plants, because today all the fashion designers send the fabric in Asia somewhere. Used to be China, now it's more increasingly Vietnam, and they sew it overseas. And so these plants overseas have the sewing machines and the factory, and they just pay a fee for a young Vietnamese person to sew it and stitch it and send it back. So my point is, here's a fashion designer who's extremely successful. The only way he's going to get a loan, not equity, but a loan, is against his mortgage of his home, because he's asset light. So my point is, just understand your business, understand what's the difference between debt and equity and which one makes sense, because it has to make sense for them and for you. And there's advantages and disadvantages.
Yes, absolutely. So it's on the topic of debt. There is, these buzzwords, mezzanine financing, and you have what you call convertible bonds. Convertible bonds is when, you start off as debt, and then eventually it, at a certain point, depending on, what the terms are, it converts into equity. So there's always creative financing, but also behind that, there's always someone like myself and like Tom who are facilitating these type of structures. So get proper advice and make sure. And on the topic of trust, I don't know how we talked about trust yet. Trust, very important in capital. Money and trust the reason why I love the Chinese culture, they don't say much. I've interacted with many Chinese. I've been to China and I've interacted with many Chinese. I've had a lot of Chinese interns. And one thing I know is they do not jump for joy at first meeting you. They really have this culture of building trust. They're not hugging you until they've known you for some time. And and I was trying to understand. I have a friend who's, who's in London, and she works in finance as well. I said, what is it about Chinese that I meet them, I'm smiling, I'm so happy? She says, they don't know you. They don't know you. So what I advise clients is pretend you're Chinese. Get to know people before you jump for joy, because investors come from all walks of life, and lenders as well. Make sure that you stay focused on the facts. Is this something that's going to help me grow, move forward, accomplish what I'm aiming to accomplish? Because just because the person smiled and said, great idea, doesn't mean you're getting the money. So also have options. But I want to go back to the different types of, I know I can't beat this enough. So the difference between an individual investor and institutional investor, which is very important as far as how you approach that as a small business. When you have, let me see, someone that you could sit down and have coffee with versus a big firm, like let's say BlackRock or
Well, how about this? Lending, let's just use the more expected scenario. What I see when it comes to lending, what I see more is for smaller amounts, like you mentioned, 10 million or less, 5 million or less. The discussion tends to be, JP Morgan won't really take my call because it's too small amount of money. I even had one client, he was a fashion manufacturer, had a relationship with JP Morgan Chase Business. COVID came and they wouldn't take his call. So I had to arrange financing for him myself because he's my friend. But the point is, I was shocked. He already had a relationship with JP Morgan. And I'm not bashing JP Morgan. That's not what I'm saying.
You can bash them.
What I'm saying, no, I actually like him. But in this particular
case, Jamie Dimon. I do.
In this particular case, he was too small. And COVID came and there was this massive need for government funds to, supplement businesses during this hard time. But his business was too small. He just had one plant in New York City. compared to these other much bigger businesses, much longer relationships. And so they didn't cancel his relationship. They just didn't take his call.
Right.
So my point is that it's not as easy to say as this is a profitable, very good business. JP Morgan should care. Citibank should love me. It's not that easy to get on their radar, to get them to be interested is not easy. So a lot of times lending, especially on the smaller sides, but I would say the benefit is you're able to be able to get other financing. As I said before, if you want 50 million, good luck finding that at your church. Good luck finding that in your, local friend circle. But if you're at 10 or 5 or 3, you might know some high net worth who could help you out. You might have a friend of a friend or a buddy that, has a friend. And then maybe you could get an individual to give you that loan, because at the end of the day, 3.5 million from JP Morgan or from Bob still spends. It's green. If you remember that show, The Jeffersons, and there's an episode where Archie's at Mr. Jefferson's house and they're like arguing. And he's like, look at that. I think they're talking about why their kids like each other. He's like, they're black and they're white. How's this? How's this? And Mr. Jefferson says, it's all green.
It is all green. It is
Yes.
all green.
And he's right.
Actually, in England, it's all purple. It's purple, orange, whatever, whatever color that money is. Very different shapes. But so thanks so much for that. So yeah, you have to be, and what you are doing is when you go to larger institutions, you're exposing yourself to more, you become more vulnerable because you're dealing with multiple people. And it could be that you're dealing with one person who ends up leaving that company, and then you have to start over the relationship, because there's a high turnover in some of these firms. When you're dealing with a smaller firm with one individual investor, that's it. Maybe if that person passes on, then you have to deal with their heirs, but that you keep it small. So you have to think about, I even tell my clients, I say, you can tell me if you don't want someone from a certain country, because I know I would rather just be honest with me. I won't judge you just because you don't want to. It's a cultural
Banks do it.
Yeah. You
Banks don't
have
take
to
clients from certain countries.
Yeah,
if you work
you
in
have
high net
to.
worth at a large bank, they have a list that is a do not work with list.
Correct. You
So
have to be honest.
You can't do business with Iran. You can't do business
Absolutely.
with Pakistan. It's nothing to do with racism. It
Nothing personal. You just got to be straightforward.
It
saves me
international
time.
regulations and safeties of clients.
Absolutely. Yeah. I had a deal. Someone came to me not too long ago, and they wanted to finance. What was it? And it was Venezuela. It wasn't that long. It was before Trump. So it must have been, I can't remember, but it was, it last 7 years. So they came to me, they wanted to fund something in Venezuela. And it hadn't been hyped up like it has been recently. And I was going all over the place trying to get funding for it. It wasn't officially on a watch list, but it was understated. And at the end of the day, I had to say, I will no longer take anything from Venezuela, because at this point, but also, if you have a preference for who you want to do business with, you can just tell the person, I want an investor from this country and not that country. What it does, it helps bring transparency to whoever you're working with as an advisor. I think, again, I give you the opportunity. The world has become so politically correct nowadays that everyone is afraid to speak up. I tell them, you have to speak up, especially the younger generation. They're afraid to speak up. So that said, just be transparent, just be honest. It will save everybody a lot of time. So as far as
I'll add to this, can I add on top of that?
Absolutely.
There is an established protocol at the large banks to filter all that you're talking about. They don't have to try to figure out politically correct or not. Just find someone at one of these large banks, Citibank, JP Morgan, Merrill Lynch, and ask them what is their policy. Because I'm telling you, they've already mapped it out. They already know the intricacies of what's good, what's not, what's dangerous, what's risky politically, what's risky from a security standpoint. Don't try to do it yourself. So for example, I recently got contacted by a Russian guy who wants to invest, but I already know the policies. I worked at JP Morgan. I worked at Deutsche Bank. And the reason I was willing to listen is because he's not living in Russia. He's living in the UK. He has a private equity firm in the UK. So theoretically, his private equity firm would be investing as a UK entity. Now, he's a Russian guy, and maybe people don't want to trust him. But the point is, he's not what would be on the list because his private equity firm is a UK entity. So
But
I'm just saying there's nuances.
so what was the name of the football team? It's Chelsea Football Club. Didn't they take it away from the Russian owner, Roman, whatever? So you got to be careful with these. So my point is to founders, basically, you don't want legal drama at such an early stage. Leave it to the big firms to battle with the government. You want to just focus on growing your firm. So stick to the basics. Start small. Start, keep the drama out of it. Of course, people who, and like myself, who have a disruptive mindset, you just want to go against the system, tend to want to, again, write their own narrative. There's, in some instances, you can. If you hold an American passport, you're going to have to abide by American rules. So keep that in mind as much as you can. All right. So we've talked about this. So now you are someone who has been, you've been on the business owner side as well, not just helping businesses. So why do you think it's so challenging for these individuals? What is the biggest challenge, you think, to raising capitals? Even if the idea is extremely extraordinary,
because there's criteria that they need to check these boxes. Number one, it's not every great idea is immediately investable. As I said before, who's the team managing it? Does the investor feel comfortable they can trust them, right? Because they want to make sure they get return on investment or they get their money back. And then secondly, there's a lot of competition for dollars. Your business compared to somebody else's. And some investors care about return on investment. And they say, one family office guy told me once, he said, I only do 10x investing. I said, Angelo, that means almost by definition, you're in the private markets. He said, oh, no, I want to be in the public markets. I said, there's only one company that I know of in the public markets in the last 5 years that's 10x. That's NVIDIA. The whole rest of the S&P, you can't invest. And he didn't realize that because he thinks 10x is a good number. It sounds like a buzzword. I'm like, you have to be careful. And so my point is that raising money is always hard. There's always stories, and one of my partners got a lucky story once too, that you mention it to your rich friend and they just give it to you. But that's the rare exception. But I do admit it happens occasionally, and that's why you got to always have your elevator pitch ready. But generally speaking, it's a hard process. There's a lot of competition for dollars. And by the way, to be clear, from the investor's perspective, there's a lot of entrepreneurs who are not going to make it. Even the best venture capital firms will tell you 9 out of 10 startups don't make it. So, and they all think they are because they wouldn't have got to the venture capital stage. They wouldn't have got to Andreessen Horowitz if they didn't look like they had something great. And yet 9 out of 10 don't make it. But that also means if you're a math person like me, the one that makes it has to make up for all the other 9. And that's why they don't invest in 2x. They don't invest in 3x. If that's your business, because they'll lose money because 9 out of 10 aren't going to work. And the one that does makes 3x. That math doesn't balance. Okay. So my point is, it is hard. We all know it's hard and expect it to be hard. And if you get lucky, you get lucky. Great. Good for you. But just understand it is hard and there's reasons. It's not because of you being a bad person. It's not because life is unfair. By the way, it is unfair. But that's beside the point.
So how important is the storytelling to investors?
Well, see, that's part of the building of the team. Not every entrepreneur is the person who should be telling the story, right? Not every person who can code and create the next, amazing technology thing can talk about it and should be
driverless cars. How about that?
What's that?
Driverless cars, flying cars.
All
Isn't
those
that where
things.
We're going?
But you see what I'm saying? The person who makes the flying car is probably not the charismatic guy you want on TV. Probably not. It's rare if they are.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because these people they live in their heads. They don't have room for people. It's outside conversations because everything is here. So there's a place for them. All these Einsteins that living among us, I think are fantastic. So let's talk about some successful raises. So we talked about, we did say that Instagram wasn't shopping Facebook, but so Facebook pitched them, right? So Facebook went to them versus how can you just how can I say, create buzz around your idea and attract the investor without you working hard, if that can be done?
There's stories of that accidentally happening, but the reality is usually it's manufactured. And the way it's manufactured is there's someone on the team that has a vision that's kind of, a thoughtful, creative, who knows how to position things and to make it, seem exciting. And that's usually very thoughtful. Even if they make it look like it wasn't thoughtful, it is. And usually it takes a different person on the team. It's usually not, like I said, the chief financial officer. Usually this is a marketing person, a creative person, someone with ideas. This isn't usually the person doing the taxes and the accounting. So just understand that. But yes, when it comes to raising money, when it comes to exiting, marketing and building the brand is always important, right? It's the same thing with the brand. Is it a nice to have or is it a must have, right? No matter what it is, whether it's tangible, whether it's clothing, furniture, jewelry, nice to have is very different than must have. And making a bridge between something that used to be nice to have, like a cell phone. Cell phone used to be something that was nice to have for the really rich. If you ever watch Wall Street Part 1, watch it again closely and look at Michael Douglas's phone when he's on the beach, calling his friend, telling him about how to be a billionaire. The phone is like this big.
Can you imagine?
And back then it was a nice to have if you're rich. Today, everyone must have. And who made it that way? Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs made the phone indispensable. But that's his engineering and his vision.
So I'm going to bring up the topic that we were talking about before the show. As far as phones are concerned, now I'm going to say it on air now that my account, my LinkedIn was hacked, last week. And I didn't have the multi-factor authentication. I didn't have the app. I didn't have anything. Actually, my assistant had put it on there and I was upset. I said, that's so inconvenient. Take that off. I screamed and I voice texted him a very long paragraph. I had to apologize to him. Sorry, I apologize. Can you put this back on? So we're talking about, being enthusiastic. So let's talk about protecting yourself as well, because there are a lot of charlatans out there who are saying they can do things. If you pay me ahead of time, I can make sure I can bring you, I can get you 10 million if you give me 500K up front, but also give me access to all your information. And then we can, I can see how I can work your books and some people have data rooms, correct? And some people just have all their financials in a data room and you give access to various people. Because this has happened to me just recently, I can tell people it's not fun. So how would you advise young founders and companies in general? I had a session about this with Jose Moreno, who has a fraud prevention technology, so I'm not sure if you know Jose, but I had a podcast with him. He's based out of London. And he talked about how to protect firms and how to protect individuals. But you, knowing how volatile the world is right now with hacking, because it seems to be a business model all in itself. You had some experiences with hacking. I recently. So what do you say to founders who are eager to just give their information out there?
So first, let me just say that you're talking about a fantastic subject, and it's also a subject that most people don't want to talk about and don't want to really focus on. But it's actually two subjects, and they're both very big subjects. One is security, and one is legal. And those are two very big subjects. And if done properly, it's a whole class. I took a whole class at NYU about intellectual property protection.
Really?
A whole semester.
You'll have to come back and talk about that, just a whole episode of that.
But then there's a separate class on legal, and my point is I can just give you a couple bullet points, but essentially on the legal side, let's just start there. You need to have a legal structure for your business, okay? You need to have either an LLC, a C Corp, or a partnership. And it's a lot to digest, but you need to really learn the advantages and disadvantages. But usually the one line that makes most people satisfied is LLC, limited liability company, because the essential ingredient is whatever your business is invariably incurs legal risk, right? You sold something and it was a misunderstanding. You sold something and it was flawed. There's all kinds of reasons why legal could be involved, but you need to separate yourself as an individual from the business, right? You should never allow a misunderstanding about your entrepreneurial venture to allow a lawsuit to access your personal wealth, right? Your personal home shouldn't be at risk because your dress that you sold to an up-and-coming actress didn't do well at the Academy Awards and now they want to sue you. You should have an LLC and they sue the company, not you. So you need that division. It's very simple. It's like $150, but it's life-changing if you don't have it. So that's just one example. But there's also intellectual property theft, right? So you talk about the name of your business. You talk about the look and feel of it. If your business is as good as you think it's going to be, there's going to be people who are going to want to steal your idea. And so you have to protect it. There's patents.
Mark Zuckerberg.
No, I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about, think about like drug manufacturing, right? They came up with these GLP-1s that can help with diabetes and then weight loss. And it's multi-billion-dollar business now. But you could steal it if there weren't laws. If there weren't laws, you could just find the one ingredient that is the secret sauce and bundle it in a different pill or a different shot and sell it yourself. And because you didn't pay for billions of dollars of research, you can sell it for what it cost. You could sell it for $50. They're selling it for $1,000. Why? Because they spent billions creating it. You didn't have that because you stole it. That's why there's laws, like 17 years from the date that you get the patent till someone else can borrow it.
That's
if
a
you
good
do
point.
it before that, that's called theft. Anyway, the point is these big firms know that and they get the wall of patents. Now let's talk about the other, security. Yes, security is
yes,
also
because you have disgruntled employees as well who have access to your information, or disgruntled partners. Talk about security and how a small firm can potentially.
So one part of security is the basics that you're talking about, which is how do you protect yourself? As you mentioned, your LinkedIn profile. My LinkedIn profile was hacked as well. And when you break it down, you find that there's people who have incentive to hack our systems. In my case, the family office that we had started, we shut it down. Somebody else wanted the name. So they bought the domain name. And I don't know what their purpose was, but they hacked my account because they saw I had that company's name on my LinkedIn. So they inserted their profile onto my profile to try to get some publicity because I have a lot of followers on LinkedIn. It's crazy. Anyway, the point is that I had to call LinkedIn and I had to work it through. And it turned out they had a legitimate, which is shocking. They had a legitimate way to hack in. But there's things you can learn to prevent this. So you do have to be prepared for this. Sometimes you make a product that offends people. Sometimes you make a product that some people
or a
don't
statement,
like.
or you have a podcast that offends people, but go ahead.
One of the older sayings in all of business, including entertainment, is you haven't made it until people hate you. That's very popular in the entertainment world. Like you don't know you made it until you have haters. Well, sometimes that applies to business. So just plan ahead that if you plan to be as successful as you think you are, there will be haters, there will be imitators. And as long as you protected it the right way, imitators aren't going to happen, but at least it follows the law, right? You get to exploit your ideas to the maximum and the imitators have to be downstream. If you don't protect yourself, there's nothing against the law to steal an idea that's not protected by a patent. If you're not clever enough to protect it with a patent and someone else steals it, it's not theft because you didn't have a patent. If you have a patent, then it is theft. But my point is, it's a natural occurrence if you're successful enough because there are people who can copy. And there's a huge world out there of entrepreneurs who do nothing but copy. Everyone thinks the traditional entrepreneur is the original, innovator, the person who came up with a great idea. There's a whole world of people who are entrepreneurs off of stealing or borrowing from someone else. And it's a very lucrative business and it's a turnover business. You can do this repeatedly over and over in life and just scour the universe every day and just look for businesses that you can copy or tweak. And you can make a lot of money that way, but you got to be careful that you're not violating. So my point is legal and security are two very important things. And my last point about security, don't ever forget your clients count on you for security. Nothing more frustrating or damaging to your brand that you have client information. Let's say you're a life insurance salesperson. You have all this very sensitive information about your clients. Someone hacks your computer at home and they have all your clients' information. Your clients will not want to do business with you if you get hacked and they're vulnerable.
So that said, I want to say thank you. So tell us, if you were a new entrepreneur in new small business, small to medium sized business, setting out to structure a new venture, how would you approach an investor today? What's the best way to build your relationship? I personally love networking on LinkedIn, and but that's because I do business globally. But what about in their local community? How can they go out and reach out? You said churches, but if they're doing cold calling, what's the best way to just go
Cold calling is
dial
really
for dollars?
difficult. Cold calling is really difficult. We always prefer the warm calls. So networking is always great, but not everybody's good at networking. And some people feel like it's work. For me, it's very natural, right? I have a perspective about it. And if I have the right perspective, it's easy. I always, don't talk about it unless I'm doing something for them. So whenever I'm mentioning an idea to someone, I feel like they should say thank you afterwards because I gave them something. I'm not begging for a favor. Hook me up, do something you wouldn't normally do because you're just doing me a favor. So I start with that from the beginning, that this is a great idea, it's a great company. You should be lucky to invest in it. And from that perspective, I don't feel bad about talking to people about it. There's a cybersecurity company I'm working with I think is going to change all of cybersecurity. And if someone invests in them, they're going to make a lot of money. They don't want to invest in cybersecurity, okay. But I'm telling you, it's a great company. So, okay. But I don't feel bad about it. I'm not begging anyone. I just say this is a great idea.
So that's fantastic. You lead me into my final question. What are the trends? What's coming? We talked about flying cars. So are we going to see flying humans? I mean, what's next?
Okay. So first and foremost,
Superman and Wonder Woman.
Okay, this is a good point because it's actually more in depth than people think. So first and foremost, AI is pretty consistently known that this is a game changer. This is going to change the world. And the reason is because the use cases are enormous and the transformation of businesses is going to be enormous. It's been compared to very fairly to the internet revolution in the late 90s and 2000. Some people say this one will be bigger, but here's the caveat. That doesn't mean that today is the day that everything's just changing. I like to remind people I hear a lot from the older generation that tells me, I missed the internet bubble because the stocks were just so ridiculously priced. I'm not missing AI. And I said, okay, fair enough. But do you realize that not everything that's going to make it is today available? Mm-hmm. So first and foremost, look at the history, look at cars. Ford came up with the automobile, the gasoline in the 30s. And then there was 100 car companies. And we know what happened 100 years later, there's 4 in the US, right? So Absolutely. Just because it's a great idea and just because it's going to change the world doesn't mean you have the ability to pick the winner. Secondly, not all the winners are even available today. I like to ask people, so if you're so certain you would have invested back in the internet bubble, which companies? And the 2 that always percolate up, Amazon and Google. And I say, actually, you proved my point. And they mean, what do you mean? I just proved my point. I said, no, you proved mine. Because number one, Amazon started as a book company. Do you buy books? Not really. Okay, well, you would have had to know that Bezos was a smart guy and he was going to grow into another business. Because when he started, he was purely buy books on the internet. That was it. Today, they're everything else. But you had to know that about Jeff, not the business. Secondly, Google. When did Google go public? People say, oh, almost certainly 96, 97, at the peak. No. 2004. The internet bubble went up and crashed before Google even got started. So if you knew the internet was great in 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, all 5 years, Google wasn't available for you. Pets.com was, and that went to zero. Google, 2004. Today, it's $1 trillion company and it's all that. But it wasn't available at the beginning. So AI, it's going to be great. And we all know. But the question is, which industries is it going to transform and which parts do you want to invest? But don't feel like you have to do it today. In a couple of years, might be a better company.
Absolutely. So I agree with you 100%. And so I would like to add robotics into that conversation. I think we'll stop seeing military deployed. We will eventually Elon Musk he is truly a visionary. And I do feel that being where he is in DC, spending a lot of time, and again, I'm fasting from politics, but this is not politics, this is technology. I do believe that we will see armies of robots. And that's where a lot of people are spending their time. So what I'm talking about, the trends, is what stimulates investor appetites right now. So we're talking about AI, robotics, anything technology. That's what you
Technology does get most of the attention because it's asset light and the returns can be enormous. Software, any business that can be disintermediated or disrupted. Because if you disrupt a business, you know what the existing business was from a TAM. And then you say to yourself, well, if we're disrupting it, we're going to take the whole thing, or we may even double the size of it. So you have a very tangible outcome, right?
Absolutely.
In the beginning, when the automobile came out, it wasn't sure how many people would really want to buy one. When Steve Jobs first had the mobile phone, how many people will carry it? We don't know. Now we know everyone. But back then, it wasn't so sure that everyone needed a cell phone. But it reached the critical mass, and then everybody had to have it.
Indeed. So I want to say, and I know, thank you so much, and I know I've taken more than enough time, but of course, you're now a guest, so which means that you can come back anytime, and we can do a whole show on securities, because that's something that is, and also that's a topic. I mean, that's an area that I'm sure that is of interest to investors. So audience, what ideas do you have that you need to discuss either with myself or with Tom? Just reach out to us. It's been such a pleasure speaking with Tom, based in New York. He is the managing director of a family office. Thank you so much for your time again. Of course, a pleasure as always. Thank you for taking the time. And did you have any final thoughts before we?
Yeah, if anyone wants some, maybe some advice on how to grow their personal business, we can see if it makes sense that I can give you some advice. Obviously, Sendra can give you advice.
How can they reach you?
So the best place to reach me is LinkedIn, just because it's just it's a nice filter. But most importantly, send me a message when you send me, just so I know how and where you're coming from, because I get a lot of stray messages on LinkedIn from random people.
Maybe my catfisher reached out to you too.
Okay. But so one is I can help them. Number two, I can help them with fundraising. And then third, if they're looking to invest, I have a whole portfolio of 20 or 30 companies that I've diligenced and I love, and I know the CEOs, and I can help match them to some companies that I already know that they might want to invest.
Fantastic. Well, this is fantastic. Well, thank you again for joining on a fantastic episode of Frankly Speaking with Sendra D. And I mentioned the episode on fraud security that I interviewed. I will link it below. So again, it's a pleasure. Until next time, stay safe, everyone. Thank you. So thanks for watching. Of course, I just want to remind you, first of all, I want to say thanks for watching, but I want to say from my heart, Sendra D, I want to remind you to grab your copy on Amazon and let me know what your thoughts are, what feedback you have, what you would have liked me to speak about. Of course, we're on this journey together. So Amazon, Kindle, paperback, Sendor Inner Luxury. And for those of you who are ready to dive even deeper, you can get ready because there's more coming. Sendor Guide to Luxury Living and Emotional Balance. That's going to be available very soon. So stay tuned, keep watching. I will announce. You follow me on my social medias as I tease a little bit of this and a little bit of that for your highest good. Remember, luxury isn't just a lifestyle. It is absolutely a mindset. And I don't know about you, I want my mindset to reflect all of the highest frequencies available to us humans. Till next time, don't forget, grab your copy on Amazon, Sendor Inner Luxury, unlocking the secret to your luxurious self. Until next time.
Oh, and don't forget, subscribe to Frankly Speaking with Sendra D's podcast and join us every week as we uncover the stories of those who triumphed over life-altering challenges to achieve not just financial success, but a richer, a deeper, a more altruistic life. It's about time we redefine what it means to be a truly affluent individual. Don't you agree? So come and join me. And let's be unstoppable on this journey called life. Because here, affluence isn't just a buzzword, it's a path to waking up to your authentic being.